I can't overstate the impact that doubt had on me. It was living in a fight or flight response for 10 years. Turns out that's actually really quite bad for you. Doubt ravaged my whole being. So I needed faith to have the similar effect and impact every area of my life. I was in the absolute depths of despair with doubt, and now I am not. You can get out of what feels like a pit with no ladder and no stairs. Faith for me, I think, always will be a roller coaster. Faith is a decision I have to repeat daily. If you're telling people that it should just be this one thing, you make one decision and then that's it, you're sorted. When people then find themselves having to come back to it, it feels like a failure.
Welcome to the podcast. If you are doubting or deconstructing your faith, you're in the right place. On this podcast, we try to be totally honest about doubt while still being hopeful about faith. Doubters are welcome here. In this episode, I talk with Kat. She's the author of Let's Talk About Doubt. Listen, I've read a lot of books about doubt, and I've thought a lot about my own doubts. But this summer, while reading Kat's book, I kept thinking, wow, I've definitely felt that way. Or, oh, I've had that same experience. I had a lot of epiphanies while reading her book. In this interview, Kat expands on her thoughts. We do a thought experiment together about the nature of doubt, and Kat offers one of the best definitions of faith I've ever heard. Is that a glowing enough review? If you like this chat, find her book and enjoy the conversation.
I have now lived in the north of England longer than I lived in London, so I'm having an identity crisis about whether I am southern or northern, which is an extremely important distinction if you are in the UK. I am from the UK, and I am talking about doubt from the context of a Christian upbringing in the UK. So there are things that are specific to my experience because of how I've been raised, but there are things that seem to be universal across the doubting experience from across the world. I was in the absolute depths of despair with doubt, and now I am not. I am an example that you can get out of what feels like a pit with no ladder and no stairs. It is possible to get out of it.
You've expressed on social media, that's where you said you spent a decade hiding your doubt from everyone. For you, what made it so hard to discuss doubt? And then what actually made you willing to talk about it to the point of publishing your thoughts? Like, how do you get to this place? Because that transition from like hiding to honesty is hard.
I mean, it's a very perceptive question, isn't it? Because it does make me laugh. It is still very surreal to me that there is this book out there with my deepest, darkest thoughts in that I did all I could to hide from everyone in my life for so many years. I think what drove keeping it hidden was the shame of it, the taboo of it. It wasn't talked about in the circles I was in. So I thought I was the only one. I thought I was a complete failure. There's this sense that if you are open about it, what are people's reactions going to be? What are they going to think of you? Are you going to lose your friends? Are you going to kind of lose your community? What does God think of you? It's far easier to slip into the stereotypical British stiff upper lip. Let's just pretend it doesn't exist and it will go away, because everyone knows that that's what happens. If you suppress things, they just dissolve. They don't, come back to bite you. From that point to this point, it was a gradual process of acceptance, kind of accepting the doubts, accepting that it wasn't that I was doing anything wrong. It wasn't that there was something wrong with me. Realizing that God wasn't reacting to my doubts in the way that I was. Once I finally was brave enough to actually, look in the Bible and see how Jesus did respond to people who were doubting, whereas I would have thought, oh, he'll be cross, he'll turn away, he'll shun them, did the exact opposite. Jesus with Thomas, or with the doubting father, he helps, he gets involved. With Thomas, he doesn't turn away, he literally walks towards him, hands outstretched. Like, that is not what I expected to see. And I think those factors, alongside finding other people who thought the same thing and experienced faith in the same way as me, slowly chipped away at that shame. The book itself didn't start out as something I thought anyone would ever read. It was just for me. And I needed to get all of that confusion of doubt out in the hope that writing it down would make some sense of it. And I often joke that the end of the book was only possible because I'd written the start. Like, it wasn't just an account of my doubt, it was part of the process. But then as I kind of got bolder and got braver on social media, I began to accept that putting it out there in its very raw and painfully honest state could help people. So I went for it. And sometimes that keeps me awake at night.
You said you were worried about losing friends, certainly about being shamed. Was that actually the case once, your next door neighbor or your friend in the pew actually reads what you've written?
In my case, no, it hasn't been the case. I have had people be very careless with me, and people who just have no experience of doubt. So literally say all the wrong things, but I can see they've got a good heart behind it. In the book, I've literally got a chapter or a page, which is things not to say to people who are doubting. And those are all real life examples. They are all things that people have said to me. So kind of the classics that I'm sure your listeners will be familiar with is, well, have you not tried praying? And have you not tried reading the Bible? As if, oh no, sorry, I've been struggling with severe existential crisis for 10 years, but no, I didn't think about praying about it. Yeah, I've had all of those things said, but no, my actual friends and family have been great, which is definitely not the experience of everyone, which is a really hard thing for people.
Yeah, and I'd love to follow up on that because in the book you wrote, I've pulled like so many quotes from the book. So you wrote suggestions and implications that doubt was a season that would be experienced and moved on from in a simple, linear fashion was extremely damaging. And I guess my question for you is, from your perspective, what is it that makes a simplistic or linear suggestion about doubt so damaging? Why does that damage the doubter?
I think probably where that came from was the hope I had held on to and the understanding that I had picked up from, being raised in a church, and I've been to churches of all kinds of different denominations, that faith was this conversion event. It happened and then you almost lived happily ever after. Like, I think that's what I mean by the kind of linear, not believing, believe, sorted. And that just wasn't my experience. It was not a linear thing. Faith for me was and is, and I think always will be, a roller coaster. Faith is a decision I have to repeat daily. Like, it's a commitment I come back to and back to and back to. And that is just not what I expected it to feel like. And I think if you're telling people that it should just be this one thing, you make one decision and then that's it, you're sorted. When people then find themselves having to come back to it, it feels like a failure.
And I know for some people it is. Like, I had a moment, I wrote it down on a card with the date, and then like for them that solidifies, like that's the time that I decided to follow Jesus. And
yeah, I mean, the caveat to all of this is what I say is my experience. I'm not saying that this is everyone's experience. I'm not saying that what I say fits everyone. I'm not in a position to judge anyone else's faith or anyone else's heart, just as no one else should be judging mine. I think that's why communication about all of this can get so messy, because it's expressing it without imposing it, I think, can be a difficult line sometimes.
Yeah, but I think in expressing what you just have, because I totally relate with it, you're creating space for another way, which is like faith is something that you have to come back to. If we present this like kind of one and done conversion experience as the only valid option, then people like you and me go, well, I don't fit into that. And so my only real option, if that's all that faith can be, is to just not have faith. But I'm not willing to do that. So I need another option. So I think it does. That does make sense.
That was exactly my process as well. It's the kind of, this isn't working for me. So what are the options here? And it was either I'm doing something wrong, or for me, well, is God really there then? And those two options kind of caught me in a trap for a decade until I discovered magical door number 3, which is that there is a different way to do this that doesn't force me to leave half of my brain and my heart behind, pretending that they don't exist anymore.
I'm wondering if like some doubters listening who have been wandering for a while might be really encouraged by that. For other doubters, that might feel discouraging because they might be desperate to just kind of move through this quickly, simply and linearly, as we kind of talked about. Like,
Yeah.
what comfort would you offer them if resolving this quickly is not an option for a doubter?
I'm very hesitant to ever advise anyone, but the truth of what happened to me is that you can't force it. If you're experiencing doubt, of course you want it to be over quickly. It can be brutal, so painful to experience. Of course you don't want to stay in that place, but that can't get you out of it. You have to deal with it. You have to fully plumb the depths of it, not just do it in a shallow way, which takes time. These are big questions about, well, the very essence of existence. They can't be rushed unless it's kind of another thing when discussing doubt is that it can mean different things to different people. So if what we mean by doubt is that you've got a specific question about a specific theology, great, buy some books on it. You might be able to deal with that and resolve that quite quickly. Talk to some people, see if you can decide what you think and move on. If it's a deeper doubt than that, or something that's more substantial that needs unpicking, I'm hesitant to say it's always going to take time because everyone is so different, aren't they? But my experience was that you need to allow it space to change you so that what you end up with at the end of that process is real and genuine and isn't hiding anything else under the surface that is going to come up to question you again very quickly.
It sounds like you believe in the process of actually
Mm.
wrestling through it. Far from shaming people for doubting, in the book, you say that the wrestling of doubt is sacred.
Mm.
That really jumped out to me because I'd love to know. I mean, sacred, there are like kind of definitions out there. Maybe we just have a sense
Yeah.
of what sacred means. But how do you define sacred? And what about wrestling with doubt do you think is sacred?
For me, the sense of things being sacred is when there's some sort of overlap with God, when you're kind of trying to put yourself into that position where you're engaging with it, wrestling with it. You're putting yourself into that position that you're really trying. And for me, that is what doubt is. If you can approach doubt as a tool, as a kind of catalyst that can help to refine your faith and strengthen it and challenge it, but burn away all of the chaff and leave the bits that are really genuine, how can that not be a sacred thing? That is you engaging rather than walking away. That is you having a dialogue. That is a relationship. If you can face doubt head on and it challenges you and forces you to kind of confront what you do believe and what your faith is actually built on, how can that not be a good thing if it's deepening things for you and strengthening the faith that you do have? None of that is to say that it isn't a deeply awful process for some people. And I do now have the benefit of hindsight, which is a horrible thing for other people to have if you're not at that point yet. But I can definitely say through gritted teeth that doubt did change my faith for the better. If you'd said that to me 10 years ago, I would have probably cried or just been really cross, but hidden it really well.
I mean, that does make sense because it feels like the broader story of faith through Christian history, but also straight back in and through the scriptures is people wrestling with God. In your book, you had commented about like, we can frame the scriptures as like, here is a book all about God's faithfulness. And you're kind of like, yeah. But on the other side of the coin is like, it's just as much a story of humans wrestling with God's goodness and his plan and his heart and whether they can actually trust it. So,
especially the Old Testament, just feels like books of people testing it out and being like, really? Is this really what this meant? And what about, how does it work in this situation? And what about this? And that can be what doubt is. It's working out how you can bring your faith with you into every situation you find yourself in. If you find yourself somewhere that, some awful situation that you never thought you'd be in, it's working out whether that needs to widen your understanding of God and faith and what goodness looks like and what blessing looks like. And wrestling is a holy thing, isn't it? That's what I think, anyway.
Yeah. I mean, that's what Israel means, right?
Yeah,
Wrestling
yeah.
with God.
I mean, I was trying not to say that because I doubted myself as soon as it came into my head. But yes, that is what Israel means, isn't it?
Yeah, and that really validates the process, and it sounds like that's what you're saying is that
Mm.
as uncomfortable and as horrible as this is, and we never wish it really on ourselves, that in the end, yeah, it's impossible to say without gritted teeth, but
Yeah.
it's part of wrestling with God. Maybe it's just the simplest way to just leave it there.
Maybe the easier way to think about it, because that is a really difficult thing to express and find the right language for. But maybe the easier way to consider it is what the alternative is. If I had continued to suppress my doubts, if I had continued to just pretend and plow on anyway, what kind of faith would that be if I wasn't willing to test it out and see what difference it could make in my life? I think that's the thing I have to come back to is yes, it was an awful thing to do, but would I want to go back to where I was when my understanding of faith and what a life of faith looked like was so narrow and completely excluded my experience of life and left me in a place where I just constantly felt like I was missing something or doing something wrong. So maybe that's an easier way to think about it is that if you are experiencing doubt, what will you end up with if you do ignore it and choose not to wrestle?
Doubt is an unwelcomed catalyst in
Yes,
faith.
very unwelcome house guest. Stays far too long, takes everything. Doubt takes everything from you, whether you want it to or not.
Which kind of shifts me into something which I don't normally do with guests, but I had this like thought experiment that I kind of wanted to bring you into, and it feels connected
Go
to
for it.
this idea of like reimagining doubt not just as some horrible illness that we're trying to get over as quickly as possible, but as something that is part of the process or can actually deepen our faith. There's this Tim Keller quote where instead of characterizing doubt as an illness, he characterizes it as an antibody that actually
Mm.
empowers faith. If we accept Keller's illustration and we're wanting to expand on it, then what do you think is the illness that doubt is responding to in order to keep your faith healthy?
I think it's a great metaphor for doubt,
Mm-hmm.
antibodies. In my head, what doubt is the antidote for is stagnancy of faith, getting absolutely stuck in a rut, not ending up at the end of your life with the same things that you thought at the beginning. Just this sense that God is huge. We can't possibly have a handle on it all. And doubt forces us to widen our understanding and expand our views. And I think crucially, to make room for other people's experience of things.
I think what Keller puts on the table has its own brilliance in that, of course, we wish we didn't need antibodies because we
Yeah.
wish we weren't getting sick.
Yeah.
I feel like it removes a lot of the stigma because no one is going to say, let's get rid of antibodies because we don't like
Yeah.
getting sick. That seems bizarre. So there's something quite redemptive to that. Something else that you said in your book, which was also very relatable. You couldn't have faked this book because it's just too relatable for the mind of a doubter. The relatable thing that you were bringing up was that you were discussing the frantic move while doubting from books to sermons to podcasts, like in search of something, in search of an answer. And you even said that that phenomenon for you had the hallmarks of an addiction,
Oh,
which
yeah,
which was like
absolutely.
such a strong word. So why did that happen, and why did that feel like an addiction to you?
In the bottom corner of the screen, you can see the beginning of the bookshelf of theology books, which are all the books that I compiled over the years. It was just completely fueled by the idea that I was doing something wrong. And if I read something somewhere or listened to something somewhere, that might fix it and make doubt go away and tie it up in a nice red bow. And that would be that. And I could move on. It's a really nuanced thing to think about because yes, it became unhealthy for me. I did become too addicted to reading these books in a desperate attempt to find something that would change it. But of course, I also did learn a lot. And in that process, I came across other people who had had similar experiences, which were part of the process of releasing that shame for me, that it wasn't just me. So it is a balancing act. I think my problem was that I was just so focused on, finding that magical password to faith in a book or magical sentence that I never actually took the time to let what I was reading absorb and change me, which is kind of the whole point of reading these books, is to consider people's opinions and then think about what you think. But that isn't how I was reading them. I didn't really realize how bad it was until I'd got out the other side and just felt a lot calmer and felt a lot more secure in my own views and not trying to take on what everyone else thought, but just thinking, you know what, I'm actually okay as I am. It is a fine line because it, of course, can be helpful for people, especially if, as we've said before, the doubt is a particular topic or a particular theological issue. Of course, read what other people have said about it. There are some hugely wise people out there. But yes, for me, it became unhealthy.
Yeah, I'll use myself as the example because for me, in terms of consuming frantically, like if I can be an emotional eater, which is like I am consuming something that isn't really like it's not really going to address what I want satisfied. Is that part of the sense in which it was an addiction? Is like I'm drawing this all in because I'm looking for a magic sentence that's going to make it all click, but it's not going to satisfy the longing that I'm after.
It definitely. And I think the catch-22 at the heart of it was that I was reading these things in order to change because I thought I was doing something wrong. But the only way that I got out of that place and into the place I am now, where I accept doubt, was I needed to understand that I was enough as I was and that I didn't need to have a heart and brain transplant to be allowed to have faith.
Could you expand more on that? It felt like you were just doing something wrong. What do you mean by that?
So I think it goes back to kind of the Christian culture that I was raised in, particularly the youth churches I went to as a teenager, that just portrayed this image of faith as this very extroverted, very present and overwhelming thing in your life, which is not the way I experience faith at all. My faith is quiet and grounded from a sense of lament and mystery and this homesick sense that I get, not a kind of loud and overwhelming thing. So reconciling those two different ends of a spectrum left me in my insecurity. That is the natural tendency of my personality, is to assume that I'm the one in the wrong. I didn't feel like the way I thought I should. Therefore, I was doing something wrong. I needed to change the way I did things, or God wasn't there. So that kind of tension locked me in a battle of thinking, well, is it that I'm doing something wrong? So I need to read all of these books to work out what that is. Or is it that God actually isn't there? And then that fueled the doubt. And as I said before, it was finding the other option of, no, this is just a bigger thing than I've ever been exposed to before. Being an extrovert isn't actually there in the list of spiritual gifts. Shocking. I know. I can be quiet about this and it still be genuine. Lament is a perfectly reasonable and very biblical expression of faith. Just look at the Psalms and the percentage of Psalms that are a psalm of lament. Finding faith by looking at the brokenness in the world is absolutely genuine. But it just took me a long time to get over that sense that it was my fault and that I was doing something wrong. For me, it wasn't about finding a different definition of faith. It was expanding my definition to allow myself room to come through the door. It wasn't excluding them for the sake of myself. It was just understanding that there was room for me as well.
That makes total sense to me. And I hope it's coming across that there are certain personality types who are just sometimes finding difficulty connecting with God in what they've been offered. So coming out of a certain tradition, let's say like one specific tradition, then doubters might look similar because a group of people are saying, we don't connect with God in this way. And our church doesn't necessarily give us a lot of opportunities to connect in the ways that feel most natural for us. I suppose the broader comment I'm making is that our personalities play into this, and we each need to ask how it is God is longing for us to connect with him as he's made us.
There's all sorts of factors that influence how you connect with a relationship with God, how you understand it, attachment theory, your personality, how you've been raised. It's absolutely fascinating how many things play into this bigger picture of how we relate to God. And then I think a huge other thing in that, which is just the life experiences we have. And if people go through things that make them question everything, they could have any kind of personality. And if these horrific things happen, then I think lots of people would question their beliefs and their understanding of what it actually means for them. So there's a PhD topic there, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I think so. I mean, I think some work has been done on it. I don't know if you've ever
I'm sure
read,
it has.
if you've ever read the book Sacred Pathways. That was quite helpful to me.
I have heard of it, but I haven't read it, but I will add it to my list. I am able to read healthily again now. I should add.
Good. Yeah, I mean, the author kind of says something that certainly in my upbringing sounds pseudo-heretical, which is like, there are more ways to connect with God than just reading your Bible and praying. Like, there are actually more ways. What I grew up with did not emphasize those other ways, though maybe they were mentioned from time to time, but we weren't discipled in understanding how to connect with God through art or creativity or the physical body. Or
I think one of the things that kept me connected at points where church was really too difficult to bear was literally just walking through our local woods. I know it's a cliche of people connecting to God in nature, but it absolutely did. And yeah, that wasn't something I'd ever heard a sermon on, but just being out in the natural world, getting away from the noise of it, did keep me grounded and kept some spark of hope alive.
yeah, and what you had said earlier, lament and the pain of the world actually being another avenue through which you wrestle and encounter God. And I think that that's totally legitimate too.
Without a doubt, that is the main thing that I come back to time and time again. It sounds ridiculous, and I will work out how to phrase this properly. It is the most frequent experience of God that I have. Just this sense of, oh, this is not how things are meant to be. I'm an exceptionally sensitive person. I get upset when ambulances go past me on the street, which I know sounds ludicrous, but I just can't get away from the fact that it is racing towards someone that is having the worst day of their life. But it's repeated experiences like that are experiences of faith to me. It brings me back to, oh, I'm having a reaction to this. Something deep within me knows that this is not how things are supposed to be. And that is lament. And lament has become my bedrock to faith. And that is not how I ever imagined I would be describing faith, but that is the place I've ended up in. And it helps me.
It's possible that another way of approaching what we're discussing right now, which I wanted to bring up, well, let me come at it this way. What does sound cliche and what I've heard like a million times is for people to say your faith needs to connect with your head and your heart. So in your book, you started a sentence that said faith cannot exist solely in your head. And I was like, here it comes. And then you said it has to connect with your whole being. And the end of that second sentence being different, like really rattled me or just kind of shook me out of the rhythm I was in of reading.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to ask you, why did you choose to say at the end that it needs to relate to our whole being? I just feel like that phrasing is very uncommon, and I'd love to know what you mean.
I think where it came from was that I can't overstate the impact that doubt had on me. I know I sound very calm and considered talking about it now, but at the point where it was hidden and it was not something that I was even able to confront within my own head, let alone talking to other people, like it absolutely waged war on me. It wasn't just that I was having questions rattle around my head. It was living in a fight or flight response for 10 years, absolutely pumped full of cortisol and adrenaline. And it turns out that's actually really quite bad for you. So where that idea of it needing to connect with your whole being has come from is because doubt ravaged my whole being. So I needed faith to have the similar effect and impact every area of my life. I needed it not just to get into my head, but to give my nervous system a bit of peace as well. It is something that I've come across other people who have kind of experienced the same thing of being stuck in that state for so long. It can have really, really devastating impacts on your physical health. It damaged me. So I needed the faith to come in and touch the areas that the doubt had impacted.
That does make sense. if healthy faith is heart, soul, mind, a whole body, a whole person
Yeah.
wellness.
It's shalom, isn't it? It's the peace of your whole being. Yeah.
You were clear in your book that you were never trying to give a comprehensive guide for how churches can be more welcoming to doubters.
Yeah.
Though I want to be like, you and I should work on one together. Let's make a comprehensive guide. That sounds fun. You said this, and I really resonated with this, is that what's needed in churches is not just an occasional nod, but a culture shift. And I mentioned earlier that we're not talking to Christian leaders right now. So this isn't the best space to start telling Christian leaders what they should do to welcome doubters. But I think to pivot the question, maybe we would say, what type of culture should doubting Christians be looking for in order to identify a church that can healthily support them?
It's such a big question, isn't it? Because it's so hard. It's not like you can go in with a tick list and be like, oh yes, they check this box, they check this one, therefore it's okay for me to be here. It's finding somewhere where doubt isn't just a word that is spoken every month or so, if you're lucky, but it's finding leaders that are willing to be honest about their own struggles if they've had them, or have an understanding of what it can be like if they haven't. It's finding communities that are loyal through all experiences of faith, that will be there for you no matter what you're going through. It's finding churches where walking through the doors doesn't force you to suddenly pretend that you've had a great week and pretend that it's all smooth sailing for you. The difficulty with that, of course, is that it takes a long time to work out if that is the kind of place you're in. I think sometimes it can be painfully quick to work out if that is not the place you're in, but there's kind of a spectrum, isn't there, of different places. You don't want somewhere that just tolerates doubt and is kind of winces a little bit, but it's okay to say it sometimes. You want somewhere where it genuinely is okay to be honest. I think whenever you have this kind of discussion, you have to put it out there for people that there are places that are absolutely not safe. I've had awful messages from people across the world who have said kind of, I've opened up and I've lost people and I don't know who to turn to anymore, and been kind of, well, for want of a better word, kicked out. But like, those places do exist, and that is absolutely heartbreaking. And that rage that fuels in me is why I try to talk about it more, so that there's less stigma about it and not so much of a taboo subject. I suppose the title of my book is Let's Talk About Doubt, and that is why I want people to talk about it, so that there aren't people sitting in the pews or in the chairs suffering in silence because they think that they're going to risk everything if they're honest. That is where I was, and it is a horrible place to be.
There's honest but cynical, and hopeful and unrealistic, and walking that path down the middle is holding that tension. Yeah. And as anyone who follows Doubters Welcome knows, it's like honest but hopeful is like baked right into everything we try to do. So discerning where that tension is being held takes time, but hopefully people can discern it.
I think it really asks you to question what you think the definition of hope is as well, because hope is a stubborn thing. I don't know how to express it really. It's not this bright, shiny bubble. It's something that you find deep, deep within you at awful times, this tiny slither of light that things could change, and that things, might not always be the same way that they are now.
Like, one thing that you mentioned in your book was that your faith started to look different from the faith of those around you, or maybe the faith that you were brought up with. What do those differences look like?
In terms of my own expectations, my understanding of faith was very black and white, very clear in what I could expect prayer to feel like. You know, I had this children's book about prayer, which was prayer as a telephone with you talking to God. And I was quite literal. And I thought, it will be as easy as hearing God on a telephone. And it promised that God had a plan for my life. Great. Where's the really clear plan? Where's the obvious direction? I took it really literally and thought that it would just be a very easy, obvious thing to do, to be a Christian and to walk a life of faith. My experience is much more in the nuance between those two extremes. So that is not what I expected. I didn't expect it to be hard. I don't think we always sell becoming a Christian as being hard, even once you're well into it, because it doesn't sound very inviting, does it? Or very attractive to people who are trying to be drawn in through the doors to hear that it's still tricky, however many years down the road. But within that, as we talked about before, is that wrestling, which has come to form a very central part of my faith, that I don't need to pretend to be someone else when I am expressing my faith. I am allowed to bring my whole self with me, and I am a naturally very shy, very reserved person. Why should that change when I'm in church? Why should I be expected to have to get up and be loud and be comfortable talking to masses of people? That's just not who I am. That's not how I've been made. There's more spaces at the table and several different tables around the room than I ever believed there could be.
One thread that has been running through this conversation that I really appreciate is that it seems like you're saying we need to renegotiate what we think it means to have faith.
Yeah.
And for some people, it's going to look different, and it's going to include more of who they were made to be and to being a whole person, maybe different than what you grew up with. But also, obviously, each individual listening will have to think about what that might look like. But we might have a simplistic definition of faith that we actually need to work through and renegotiate. And I think that's an important lesson.
I mean, in terms of my own definition, I mean, you just can't get away from faith is being certain, can you? To be saved, you have to be sure that, and I'm not saying that's my definition, that is where I started. And that plagued me and absolutely haunted every step of my life, that, you know, I had to reach a place of certainty, otherwise it wasn't genuine faith. And I'm by no means the first person to say this, but that doesn't have to be true. There are definitely people that are certain, but that isn't the only way to be. And the kind of working definition of faith that I end up with at the end of the book, it's faith as movement towards Jesus. In whatever form that takes for you, it is staying in motion, keeping on, trying to move forward with Jesus as a focus point. And then it kind of expanded in my head into this idea. I do hate the journey of a cliche. No, other way around, the cliche of a journey. But it's so good, isn't it? And just this idea that doubt didn't have to be like a massive brick wall in the way that stopped me moving forward. It can be a backpack. Sometimes it can be quite heavy. It might mean you need to stop for a while and have a rest, but it doesn't need to prevent you from moving forward. That sense that I can be a doubtful Christian, and I can do it with doubt and regardless of doubt and in spite of doubt and because of doubt sometimes, is what led me away from shame of it and the fear of it, and has allowed me to get to the point I am now, that I am trying and I'm doing my best and I'm not pretending, because why would God want me to lie about these things? Surely my honesty is more acceptable and meaningful to God than if I was, you know, rocking up in prayer saying things that he knew I didn't mean. What's the point?
Yeah, I really like that definition of faith. And you don't have to apologize for using journey, because the most controversial thing you said on this podcast is that it's cliche. It's not cliche. It's brilliant and it's beautiful, and we talk about it all the time.
Okay. Do you know why it is? Have you come across the TV show Strictly Come Dancing? I think it's the same as Dancing with the Stars in the US. Oh, they talk about the dancer's journey every week, and I can't handle it anymore. That is why I can't handle the word. Yeah.
Well, fair enough. No, but I mean, I'm in wholehearted agreement. I mean, literally the tagline for Doubters Welcome is journeying with doubting Christians toward faith in Christ. And so I really like what you said, because it implies that this work is an act of faith.
Definitely.
To say, okay, I'm going to try to journey toward Christ despite doubt. So I love that definition. One kind of final question, which is just kind of, I end every interview this way. Is there anything that is on your heart or that you wanted to express that my questions just didn't give you a space to say? I want to open it up and let you express whatever you'd like in this time.
I suppose just that I'm so grateful that not just that you've invited me on the podcast, but that there are other people out there trying to talk about it, because I suffered alone for so long, as I'm sure loads of other people have done, to come across people who are trying to do the same work in different ways or their own way is what I'm now passionate about, is what drives me to get beyond my shyness and my reserved nature and talk about it, is to try and make a difference for people, for the people that are stuck in it and are feeling alone and are feeling isolated. So yeah, what's left unsaid is thank you. Thank you for what you do.
You're welcome. And thank you so much for your book. I've read a lot of books on doubt, and you can expect the chapter about how we don't require certainty, and you can require the little apologetics chapter, and you can, there's so much that you can predict. But when I picked up your book, I was just like, this is just a book of someone who is outlining the contours of a doubting heart in a way that I hadn't seen before. So I was just really grateful for that.
And that took a lot from me. Obviously, when I wrote it, I didn't think people would read it, but to then, once publication was kind of in the picture, to leave that stuff in was a really, really difficult decision to make, to put something out there that was so raw and so honest, was fueled by the same thing that I've just talked about, that, oh no, it's another cliche, but it is that I wrote the book I needed to read. Like, I needed not someone just talking about it in hindsight when they had kind of airbrushed over the difficult bits so that they don't look quite as bad. I needed the brutality of it, brutality and reality, that it is awful. And I needed to know that it wasn't just me.
Thanks for listening to the podcast. If you're wrestling with doubt, but not sure where to start, can I let you know about something new Doubters Welcome is offering? It's called 30 Days of Encouragement for Journeys of Doubt. When my doubts about Christianity became so undeniable that I finally chose to address them, things actually got harder because I felt like I was wandering in the dark. I wanted to address the fear and isolation and confusion caused by doubt, and I wanted to find stability, support, and clarity for the pilgrimage ahead. I knew all of those things would be essential for a healthy journey through doubt. So, how do we learn to journey well? There are reminders scattered about, like remembering to pray honestly while doubting and using the faith we have even when it's weak. There are insights like learning how to identify helpful mentors and address the questions at the core of our doubts. I came to these things slowly over a decade of searching and reading books, interviewing experts, and making videos on doubt. Each insight encouraged me and guided my journey. Now I want to encourage you on your journey through doubt. Starting tomorrow, you can receive one short email per day for the next 30 days, each with an encouraging thought that I hope will help you navigate doubt. Go to doubterswelcome.com/connect to sign up and get some encouragement for your journey. I'll see you next time.